Why does Saturn have rings? What are the different types of clouds? How does an octopus swim? Why does a tiger have stripes? How do flowers grow?
Tell me why. The Video Encyclopedia is a reference work that's designed to show the answers to questions that young people ask. All materials used in this work are based upon the best-selling book series by Arkady Lyoko. Since his first recordings on the walls of caves, man has been fascinated by flight. The law of evolution itself seems to have predestined that man, although not physically, but mentally should prepare himself to transcend beyond the surface of the earth. The first vertebrate able to fly was not the bird as one might think, but the reptile pterosaurs. About 150 million years ago, this huge lizard had a wingspan of over 7.7 meters, or 25 feet. It must have been quite a sight as it glided over the heads of early man. Actually gliding more than flying, the pterosaurs had to jump from a high position in order to become airborne. To early dreamers of flight, the bird was the most obvious choice to imitate. Some of the earliest actual attempts to fly were carried out by men who tied feathers to their arms and flapped. Their failures no doubt encouraged the belief that flight would never be a possibility for mortal man, but still, deep in his heart, man dreamed.
Why can't man fly?
Man can't fly because of the Earth's gravitational force making him heavier than air. In 200 BC, a Greek man named Archimedes discovered how and why objects floated in water. However, air, which could not be seen, was never considered to be bound by the same principles. To early man, the answer of why man couldn't fly was quite simple. He couldn't get off the ground. This answer seemed to hold up fine. However, in the 1550s, an Italian scientist named Galileo provided a more scientific explanation. Galileo came up with the law of falling bodies. The law said basically that if an object fell someplace where there was no air, like a vacuum, the object would fall faster and faster the longer it fell. There would never be a maximum speed. However, if an object fell where there was air, it would reach a maximum speed. That's because the air causes resistance. This law would later have a major impact on the designers of all modes of flight.
What is flight?
The definition of flight is quite broad. An object flies when it is propelled or becomes airborne by its own accord. It can glide, soar, hover, or float. When an object soars, it not only glides, but can also gain speed and altitude by making use of air currents. Birds of prey use this technique when circling for hours above the heads of their observers. Rarely does one see a buzzard or soaring hawk flap its wings once in flight. Man-made soaring objects, such as certain types of gliders, are based upon the technique used by these birds of prey. For hovering aircraft, such as helicopters, man copied the flight patterns of hummingbirds and bees. Similar to treading in water, an aircraft hovers by treading the currents in the air. Floating occurs when an object weighs less than the atmosphere surrounding it. Whether in water or air, the principle remains the same. A relaxed swimmer and helium balloons, like those sold at carnivals, are a perfect example of objects that float.
What's the difference between heavier than air and lighter than air flight?
As Roger Bacon proposed, objects in the air have a buoyancy just as if they were in water. And whether it be air or water, if the mass of the object is heavier than the mass of the atmosphere around it, it will sink or fall because of the law of gravity. Most flying apparatus are heavier than air. To stay in flight, they must either be able to glide or soar like kites and gliders, hover like helicopters, or be propelled like rockets. Spacecraft and airplanes combine gliding and soaring with artificial propulsion. The only exception to heavier than air flight are balloons.
What is Kitty Hawk?
No, it is not a bird, but it might as well have been, for here is where the airplane was born. Kitty Hawk, North Carolina seemed an unlikely place to change world travel, but it was here on December 17, 1903 that Orville and Wilbur Wright flew the first successful motorized airplane. Having experimented previously with gliders, the Wrights completed the dream inventors had envisioned for thousands of years. The United States War Department immediately saw the possibilities for the airplane, and in 1908 signed an agreement with the Wright brothers to test and develop airplanes. Both world wars saw great advances in aircraft development. Commercially, air transportation is now the principal means of long-distance travel.
How does an airplane fly?
Because of the mass of the air around it, it needs some force to hold it in the air. This force is called lift. Consider a water skier. When a skier is pulled quickly behind a boat, he skis easily across the water. The faster the boat goes, the more the skier seems to glide. However, when the boat slows down or stops, the skier begins to sink. The force that kept the skier afloat is the lift. An airplane develops lift by moving forward swiftly in the air. As the air flows over the airplane's wings, the air under the wings pushes the airplane up. Because of the shape of the wings, the air being forced over the wings is angled into a slight upward curve. This creates an area of decreased pressure. These two effects help a plane fly. The air under the wings pushes the plane up, and the decreased pressure of the air over the wings makes it easier to do so. The result is lift. For a plane to move forward, it must be propelled. This can be done either through jet engines or propellers. Propellers work much the same way as a screw. Think of the air as solid. As the propeller turns, it screws into the air, pulling the plane forward. This is called thrust. The air spirals around the plane, causing a vortex. The thrust of the plane helps the aircraft to overcome the drag or resistance the solid body has in moving through the air. Although most people think of jet engines as being a major development of the 20th century, the principle behind jets was actually discovered by a Greek mathematician named Hero of Alexander in about 120 BC. Most children discover the secret of jet propulsion and never recognize it. Think about an ordinary balloon. When it's blown up, the pressure inside the balloon is equal all around. However, when the end is opened, air begins to flow out of the balloon, and the pressure becomes unequal. More pressure is now at the front of the balloon than at the end. It is this pressure at the front of the balloon, not the air leaking out of the back, that makes a balloon take off and fly around the room. And that's the secret behind jet propulsion. There are basically two types of jet engines, ramjets and turbojets. Ramjets are the simplest type because they have no moving parts. Actually, they're like a glorified stovepipe. Air is forced into the pipe through the intake as the plane moves forward. Once inside the jet engine, it is mixed with fuel and burned. This increases the gas volume by about 5 times. The gas then is exhausted through the tail end. The faster a ramjet moves through the air, the more power it will produce. Turbojets are a little bit more complicated than ramjets. Air is sucked in by a compressor and then forced into a combustion chamber where it is mixed with fuel. Once the fuel burns, the gases are forced through a turbine and escape through the exhaust nozzle. If the energy is delivered to the turbine and the turbine shaft turns a propeller, we have a combination jet engine called a turboprop. No matter if the plane is powered by a propeller, a jet engine, or a combination of the two. As long as the upward lift and the pull of gravity are the same, the plane will fly level and straight. If the person who is qualified to fly the airplane, called the pilot, increases the speed, more lift is created, causing the plane to climb. If he wants speed only and not altitude, the pilot must turn the plane's nose down. This will make the plane continue to fly level and straight, only faster. When the speed is reduced, the pilot must do just the opposite. He must bring the nose up to compensate for the loss of lift. If he doesn't, the nose drops. The plane stalls and it may go into a spin. If a plane stalls high above the ground, there is enough altitude to enable the pilot to recover and regain speed. But if a stall occurs too close to the ground, it may result in a crash. Weather conditions can affect the performance of a plane drastically. The National Weather Service in the United States keeps an hourly record of weather conditions, such as the amount of cloud cover, rain, snow, humidity, height of clouds, temperature, and visibility. If any of these factors can contribute to unsafe flight conditions, planes may be grounded. While passengers may grumble at the wait, it is required for their own safety.
What are some different types of planes?
The earliest successful types of airplanes were mostly biplanes. The biplane has two wings, an upper wing and a lower wing. The two wings are held together by struts or vertical supports, and the spars, which are the horizontal supports. Wires help brace the struts and spars in place. The truss-like structure of the biplane was very well adapted for flight because it was not only light, but also very sturdy. The principal disadvantage of the biplane was the drag produced by the exposed wing parts compared to the wing size. Biplanes were used a lot in aerobatics, which is kind of like acrobatics in the air. Today, all sorts of airplanes are used in aerobatic performances, but the same 5 basic maneuvers have remained unchanged: vertical flight, slow rolls, stalls, inverted flight, and snap rolls. The same rules also still apply: safety and planning first. As technology advanced, so did the speed and size of the pilot's toys. The rocket-powered X-15 is one of the most notable of these aeronautic advances. The X-15 has been clocked at speeds beyond 4,500 miles per hour, or Mach 6, which is 6 times the speed of sound, and has attained an altitude of over 67 miles above the Earth. Advancements surrounding the development of the X-15, conducted by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, and the U.S. military, had 2 benefits. It laid the foundation for the jet, revolution in commercial air transport, and it took man to the lower fringes of space. It was here that they were no longer simply pilots. They became astronauts, or sailors among the stars. Test pilot Robert White flew the first X-15 and became the first pilot to qualify as an astronaut by achieving an altitude of 50 miles above the surface of the Earth. Test pilots are pilots who risk their lives to test new or experimental aircraft. Through maneuvers designed to test a plane's strength and controllability, test pilots take man into new dimensions never before explored. One of the strangest types of airplane is the vertil. A vertil is any number of tilt-wing convertiplanes. This means that the blades can be positioned horizontally or vertically. Vertils are almost a cross between a helicopter and an airplane. The advantages of the vertil is that it has the forward speed of an airplane and is capable of a vertical takeoff like a helicopter.
A rocket is any device which uses combustible material to send out burning gases from one end at a very high speed. Using Sir Isaac Newton's third law of motion, for every action there is a reaction. The gases propel the rocket. The gases push the rocket directly. They don't push against anything in the rear, they merely push the rocket because this is the gas's reaction to coming out. A rocket doesn't need air to move forward, and since it doesn't need air, it can go up into high altitudes where the air is thin, or even completely into space. In fact, when there is no air at all, there is no friction. This lets the rocket move even faster. Based upon this principle, once a rocket has escaped from the Earth's atmosphere, it can continue to travel even after it has used up all of its fuel. They are used to explore the world around us by sending probes into the stratosphere to map weather conditions, to test the latest developments in aerospace medicine, and to place satellite communications devices far above the Earth's atmosphere. The same rockets used for initial space exploration were first used in warfare during World War II. As a matter of fact, the intermediate range and intercontinental ballistic missiles using advanced rocket engines made Earth orbital satellite flight possible. The first actual rocket to be sent into space was the Russian Sputnik 1. In October of 1957, it became the first artificial satellite to orbit around the Earth. The United States sent up its first artificial satellite, called Explorer 1, in January of the following year. Almost immediately with the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belts, Explorer 1 began to contribute to the understanding of the worlds around us.
What are satellites?
The moon is a satellite. Some satellites have satellites. A satellite is basically any celestial body that is traveling around another celestial body. As most satellites are natural, those placed in space by man are called artificial. Sir Isaac Newton in the 17th century was the first man to record the possibility of an artificial satellite in his theory of celestial mechanics. There are two types of artificial satellites, passive and active repeater. The passive satellites were more prevalent in the beginning of the space program, but have since been all but phased out. Their only function is to reflect signals directed at them back to Earth. The active repeater satellites are more practical in that they receive, amplify, and transmit microwave signals back to Earth and into space. The first active repeater satellites were used in telecommunications. Some of the more famous ones were Telstar, Relay, and Syncom. Satellites, whether they be artificial or man-made, travel in an elliptical orbit, which means that the orbit is more egg-shaped than rounded. Because gravity in a body such as the Earth is inconsistent, the satellite will be pulled toward Earth more at different times than at others. For a satellite circling the Earth, the furthest point is called the apogee, and the nearest point is called the perigee. The difference in the apogee and the perigee could be up to several thousand miles. If not for gravity and inertia, the satellite would follow Newton's first law of motion and continue in a straight line throughout the universe. Satellites come in all shapes and sizes. The structure of a satellite is dependent upon its purpose. NASA has even inflated balloons in space and used them as satellites. The most famous balloon satellite was Echo 1. Satellites are used for communication, weather observation, navigation, map making, and military reconnaissance. It is even suggested that satellites may provide a more clean and efficient power source for the future by converting continuous sunlight into microwaves. These will be transmitted to Earth and then converted into electricity. Powered by either short-lived fuel cell batteries or long-lived solar cells, satellites have helped man greatly understand his world and the worlds beyond. The United States sent Alan Shepard Jr. into a suborbital flight around the Earth. Shepard's flight was the first phase of the United States Mercury program, announced in 1960. The Mercury program was the initial stage of the Apollo program, and during the Apollo program, man would eventually walk on the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
The first American in space was also part of the Mercury program. John Glenn Jr. made 3 circles around the planet and is probably the first astronaut to manually pilot his craft, Friendship 7, when the automatic controls began to malfunction. Astronauts in the Mercury program communicated with Earth by radio and radio waves. A video camera was also positioned inboard to send continuous pictures back to Earth. Life support systems supplied the astronauts with food, water, and oxygen. Oxygen and water were carried in tanks. Food was freeze-dried and stored in meal-sized packages. Solid body wastes were sealed in plastic bags and stored while liquid body wastes were released into space. Navigation equipment for the astronauts included sextants, gyroscopes, and small electronic computers, which helped the astronauts find their position in space and check their course. Flight in space for the Mercury capsules was controlled by small rocket motors placed strategically outside the spacecraft. The second phase of the Apollo program was Project Gemini. It was an expansion of the Mercury program in that the space capsules were bigger. 2 astronauts were sent into space instead of 1, and time in space was increased to up to 2 weeks. Consisting of 10 flights between 1965 and 1966, Project Gemini allowed scientists to monitor conditions of extended periods of weightlessness. The effects of human contact with possibly dangerous radiation was also examined. Scientists wanted to know how the psychology and performance level of the astronauts were affected by these new conditions. In addition to these human tests, Gemini was used technically to perfect orbital rendezvous and docking techniques, which would be crucial to future Apollo missions. The last phase of the Apollo program put men on the moon. Once again, the dreams of men throughout the ages were realized when Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin of the United States stepped out onto the surface of the moon on July the 20th, 1969.
Contact light. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind.
They seemed to have a good time, but not quite as fun as those men of Apollo 15. What's more fun than a 4-wheeler on a mountain, a lunar rover on the moon? This Jeep-like vehicle was brought to the moon by the lunar module Falcon, while the spacecraft Endeavour remained in orbit around the moon. At the end of the Apollo missions, Richard Nixon in 1972 had the option of canceling the space program or continuing it. He opted for approving a decade-long program of delivering payloads into space. The challenge was to make space operations economical. The result was the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle system uses a reusable orbiter about 120 feet long, 2 retrievable solid fuel rockets, and 1 expendable liquid propellant rocket. These 3 rockets fuel the Space Shuttle main rocket during ascent. The solid boosters separate from the Space Shuttle at approximately 28 miles above the Earth. They parachute into the ocean and are recovered, repaired, refurbished, and then reused. The external tank of liquid propellant burns up over the ocean. The Space Shuttle re-enters the Earth by using wings, parachutes, and ballistics. The Space Shuttle orbiter is mostly aluminum and has a thermal protection system of thousands of lightweight ceramic tiles. The first reusable manned spacecraft, Columbia, was launched in April of 1981. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen orbited the Earth 36 times in 2 days and 6 hours. As with most advances, there have been tragedies. History is filled with the names of those who have lost their lives for the betterment of the human race. From the earliest parachutes, gliders, planes, and spacecraft, there have been disasters that have confirmed the skeptics' belief that man has gone as far as he could go. But luckily, they were wrong. Science fiction has become reality, from balloons to space. Man has proven that all he has to do is dream. Tell Me Why, a video encyclopedia series designed to answer the questions that kids ask most. It's a unique tool, a well-thought-out educational project created to take advantage of every child's fascination with video. Tell Me Why turns that fascination into an invaluable learning experience, providing kids with the answers they want and need through a series of 26 information-packed volumes. Tell Me Why. It's the perfect way to turn the family television set into a second classroom. And it's so much fun, taking a field trip without leaving home. Tell Me Why is an innovation in education, with exciting film footage from organizations such as NASA, the National Aquarium, and the National Hurricane Center, as well as an easy style and colorful graphics. Children will want to watch each volume again and again. Quick search numbers have been provided in the lower right-hand corner so that you can fast forward to the section you want to view. This video encyclopedia is modeled after the nationally syndicated newspaper column and the critically acclaimed book series of the same name created by Arkady Leokum. Inspired by questions asked by his own children, Leokum has captivated a generation of children with explanations on a myriad of topics.